Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Good evening. It is the 4th of June, and it's raining. I found this piece on Facebook, obviously, and it's by this group called Armed with a Pen. And I thought it was pretty interesting. And I didn't write this, but I feel like this analysis is really solid, and I just wanted to share. And it reads, what we're going to see as these rebellions continue is that the national bourgeois is in fact opposed to imperialism. And the final conclusion of imperialism is that the imperialists have everything and those colonized peoples have nothing. Even reactionaries admit that this is bad for business, and the violent police response has only exacerbated the crisis. Now, this is a threat to more than just workers. Imperialists and their state arms are a threat to every class and strata in America, and just as the plantation aristocracy and their declining slave system threaten the entire United States, it's only a matter of time before the national bourgeois is forced to pick a side, and frankly, the imperialist promise is only greater destabilization. And so, just as the northern industrialists ultimately allied with the black nation in revolt, national capitalists are going to have to ally with colonized people if they want to maintain their existence. Already suffering from this pandemic and the imperialist government's failure to respond, and what remains of America is going to have to open up, and it's going to have to pay these long overdue reparations and finally join the world on equal footing. So profit and power will have to yield to necessity, and hopefully a new democracy is going to have to replace this imperialist dictatorship. And so, with that, I want to thank our special guest tonight. Dennis Childers is here, and he's going to share with us some of his thoughts on the abolition of police movement. And you know, we've got a pretty good amount of stuff to talk about tonight, and hopefully you'll enjoy what we've been putting together for us.
Yeah, I think the abolition of police is an interesting one because a lot of people have a knee-jerk reaction to it that is like, well, what about the violent crimes and what about the crimes against people who can't protect themselves? And it's funny that those are the initial responses because, number one, those people who make that response generally don't care about those demographics unless it's in response to that question. And number two, the cops don't actually protect those people from those situations and are oftentimes not following up in a way that actually protects that demographic, or they're making it worse in one way or another. So it's not even just that, before we even get there, we have ways to solve that. There's multiple ways to solve that problem. But let's just kill the narrative that cops even actually solve violent crimes. They don't solve violent crimes.
They exacerbate the problem.
They exacerbate many problems, especially mental illness responses, but they don't actually solve like the violent crimes that many people will say, if you want to abolish police force, how are you going to stop these crimes? Because they don't stop them. So, again, that's where the things that we'll discuss today, I actually had been working on a couple different projects, and in my line of work as a cybersecurity specialist, one of the things that I had started working on was the notion of a decentralized neighborhood watch, in the sense of it was also alongside a program or a project that's no longer being worked on, but it was like for anonymous reporting of like police tips or things about crime or abuse or something, because many people Now they understand in the middle of national riots, there is a benefit to being able to report something without your name being involved. I mean, it's like, I don't know who we're going to report corrupt cops to, because the FBI is corrupt as well. But the issue is, if there were, I was going to say, if there was an actual force in America that we could find that served justice, then we would eventually be able to report to them. But in that light, what I was getting at is, I've been working on a program to do decentralized neighborhood watch, like before this, way before this had even gone down. And I enlisted the help of martial arts specialists and law enforcement specialists to start going over the tenets of what something like that would look like to be effective. But now, in light of the police force obviously being murderous, corrupt thugs, the notion of replacing them is more relevant than ever. So Dennis, go ahead.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic, man. One of the things I like about us is I was sitting there doing homework earlier myself and drawing upon some of, the history that I've learned in college about statistics from other countries of other police departments, and their, not just their numbers, but their cultural attitude towards law enforcement and the foundations of how they developed their law enforcement mechanisms in their country. And on Facebook, I don't know if you had seen it, I had put up specifically a thing. I've always been fascinated with Germany, modern Germany, obviously, post-war Germany. Even per capita, I guess, like population-wise, their numbers of fatalities and shots fired and violent confrontations are way lower than America. Way lower.
Yeah, when you sent me that, I actually started looking into the disparity in the number of firearms discharged between U.S. states, specifically New York, because it seems like New York was the only state that was tracking this stuff, at least from what I could find with a quick glance. And the scariest part about it is, New York, they were only tracking the amount of times the police, pulled their weapon, essentially, not the amount of bullets that they spent. Whereas it seemed like the German survey was tracking the actual number of bullets used. And then when I found another, and in the same year, it was just like the numbers were very similar between Germany and New York State. But then when you compare New York State versus like United Kingdom over the span of like a decade, New York State was discharging their weapon easily like 10 times more than the United Kingdom.
But you also have to look at not to justify it, but you also have to look at the population.
That's true.
Sizes and densities in those situations. Like when we're comparing Germany to states, like that's because Germany is the size of a state. This is because
absolutely.
Britain is the size of a state. I mean, and again, that's not to justify it. It's just more to say like those are comparable to some of our states.
I was definitely honing in on more of the cultural attitudes towards law enforcement and sort of what is justice and what is law. That when you look at statistics, German cops shoot way less than American cops, even if you were like you boil down the numbers, right? And then they have to do paperwork, even if they pull their gun out of the holster. They cultivate a culture of like, well, if I even have to draw my gun, I have to do paperwork. I have to be held accountable. Versus the United States, where like, it was brought up that some police departments, I don't even think even keep accurate records of violent confrontations, which is kind of scary to me. I'm like, wow, man, you don't even put those in the books.
So just for scale, New York State's 19.4 million, Germany's 83 million, and then United Kingdom is 66.5 million. Because then I'd be interested to look at the population densities in that it's like they also have different mandates for their forces. So like I know Britain, for example, their regular street cops can't just carry. Well, I think they might have changed it in London, but for a long time they weren't allowed to carry firearms. They just weren't allowed to carry.
Yeah, culturally, that's a thing that they have, and especially if you move up north into the northern England into Scotland, they tend not to want to carry firearms, right? Like, and which is very different, obviously, than us Americans. Their cops are like, we want to be more engaged. I'm not saying their system is perfect by any stretch.
No, well, the issue is that, most UK police still don't carry guns, but it's because they have broken it up so that they only break out the guns if they're in response to someone who's like armed and shooting. So like an active shooting situation where it's like, I mean, in many cases, so the street beat officer can't escalate to a shooting because they don't have a gun. So there's kind of a check in place, a check and balance where not arming all these officers is something where in America, the modus operandi is that, every cop should be able to neutralize someone on the scene, when the issue is they're never on the scene. That's not how they roll. They're always rolling around with their windows up. Very few cops are actually street beat foot cops. They're all in their cars, so they're always going to be responding. So it's like if they had their gun in their car and not on their hip, it'd be much more difficult for them to like justify responding in the way that they do, because it's like they don't need it on their hip. If they have it in their center console, like in the what was it? There was some movie where the cops center his gun wouldn't unlock, and it's like the point of they're trying to make it seem like if a cop can't get to his gun, then he might get in a situation where he needs it. But they shouldn't be able to just draw them when they are pulling somebody over and somebody has a cell phone and a trigger-happy cop is poorly trained. So it comes to, we'll talk about the training real quick, because I've been in a situation where someone called me nigger. No, he didn't call me nigger. He dropped the M-bomb like around me in a way that he immediately was like, oh, my bad, because he was saying it. And then within like 10 minutes, he's like, oh, your friend told me you do martial arts. Because like as soon as he said the N-word, I'm like, okay, this dude wants to fight me for some reason. And in my head, I'm like, this dude just wants to fight. And I'm like, this is going to happen. Because we were in a situation where it's like, you can't, there's nobody around. We're in the country, but it's not my main friend, and he's like a friend of a friend. So this guy gets to a situation where he's like, oh, I heard you do martial arts. You don't look like you do martial arts. And it escalates to a point where he's like, show me what you can do, and basically is like swinging on me. So I'm like, I can escalate it and take out all my frustration for him dropping the M-bomb, or I could de-escalate it. So I de-escalate the situation in a way where I'm like, this dude is clearly wrong, but because I'm trained enough that I don't have to like hurt him to de-escalate the situation, I'm not going to. So all cops should be trained that well.
Oh my God,
There's no reason all cops should not be trained that well. Every cop should be trained to de-escalate a situation, no matter what, in a way that the other person doesn't get hurt. Period. If a cop isn't trained that well, they shouldn't be carrying a badge.
Great point, man. I had talked about this earlier with other folks, the idea, and all three of us being martial artists, like if you're genuinely trained and you're confident in your abilities that are real world applicable, like the idea that if you get into a tense situation that theoretically could get somebody killed, but the worst of the situation that comes out at the end of it is you break somebody's arm or even like hurt somebody's feelings, right? Like that's the ideal. Like, but you have a whole group of folks, man, or specifically, and I don't even want to say folks, of machismo men who rely on their gun. First and foremost, they have absolutely no training in de-escalation or restraint techniques, or even the simple idea of a painful but non-lingering injury armbar, or even choke. And I don't mean the kind of choke that results in death, but the kind that like makes somebody, holy crap, but it's gonna be gone as soon as the hold is released, sort of training, right? Like, where did that go? Why is that not present? The idea that you could train somebody, like, I can de-escalate this situation by either being trained by psychiatrists or drug counselors. And if that fails,
so I just want to point out. Right? I just want to point out. I don't consider myself a martial artist. I consider myself to be more of like a student of the philosophy and the discipline of martial arts, and I love it. I think it's a fantastic methodology to teach discipline, and I think that's part of a well-rounded training regimen or school of thought or practice. It has to be coupled with a strong philosophical background and discipline so that you can de-escalate a situation, because it shouldn't always come to striking or grappling. It shouldn't have to come to that at all. I think that should absolutely be the last thing that one should ever really hope to accomplish, is that you have to physically engage with somebody, because that means that it's on at that point. And like, not to say that some old man who's been studying Tai Chi can't whoop my ass, because he probably can. Like, but that's the thing, is that I would actually hope that old man who studied Tai Chi his entire life and has mastered the forms would be able to recognize that there's another path. It doesn't always have to end in engagement. And that's what our police officers need to understand. It doesn't have to always end in engagement, and they just jump to engagement. At least that's what we see in the media.
Exactly. Like the idea that, like, if you're confronted, what can I do to disengage? I mean, that's how I was trained. So, like, what can I do to quickly get away from you to cause the least amount of harm? And I was trained in a martial art that people misunderstand as the most dangerous, traditional Japanese jujutsu. That we're like, oh, wow, you've done this. I was like, yes, I can theoretically do those things, but I also got taught by a very elderly, half Korean, half Japanese man that it's like, you don't put on clean clothes and go down a muddy street, right? The idea that, like, you de-escalate first. And it's like this element is missing from the wannabe warrior culture that cops have adopted, especially post 9/11. They have militarized, they have ramped up the machismo, and they want to go, like you had said, they want to go direct to confrontation, missing all these other beautiful elements of training to be human. And the key phrase to me is be human, right? Like, wow.
Well, and it's funny because I think when you're talking about some of the philosophies that you were given by your teacher, those philosophies were instilled in me by my teachers in ways where, um, you know, it's crazy, like how much martial art teachers know that what they're teaching is going to be situational, but at the same time they're trying to teach it to you to protect yourself and potentially someone else and not to hurt people. And in no realm, I mean, there's people who teach for fighting in like a sport, but in no realm did I ever get a teacher that was trying to teach me to hurt someone. It was never ever a thing in any classroom or dojo or whatever you want to call it, where that was like the Cobra Kai shit you see. That culture was real in America, but I never actually saw that in one martial art dojo in my life. Not to say that it didn't exist.
No, absolutely. When you step into real traditional ones, that doesn't exist, and which kind of bleeds me into another point. And I had shared, I don't know if you guys had seen the post. A great number of U.S. police departments train under Israeli military units in Israel. And I've seen some of the inhumane techniques that they learn and the attitudes that they learn, and they bring them back here. And they're almost, there's not almost, they are often identical to how they dehumanize on the philosophical level and then dehumanize on the physicality level. And it's ugly.
Yeah, there's a lot of war tactics that have been adopted by the police, but also gone back and forth where, you hear this use of tear gas being something that they're not supposed to be doing. But I forget which international law, but it's like the militarization of the police has gotten so bad and we are so used to it, but it's so disproportionately applied to people of color of all classes and poor white people, that it makes it difficult to discuss. When the All Lives Matter people try to discuss their plight, it's not that they don't actually have plight as white people in some cases, is that they are so ignorant of the plight of a rich black man that they think that them being poor as a white person somehow puts them on par, when it's like a completely different, like a poor white person can call the cops on a rich black man. If that is in the wrong spot, that rich black man might end up getting killed. Because they have multiple situations where somebody's like a shop owner and the cops got called on somebody and the cops arrest the shop owner because the shop owner is a person of color, whether they're black or, Hispanic or Arab or something, where it's like there are so many elements of. It's funny how people forget when people cheered OJ's verdict. It wasn't the fact that black people knew that motherfucker was guilty. The reason that black people cheered is that OJ represented a black man who was able to buy himself out of a crime like white men have been doing. So on the one hand, it was like a bittersweet victory for black people, but with the acknowledgement that he was guilty as fuck. All black people knew OJ was guilty. Yeah, that motherfucker did it. But white people couldn't understand why I didn't cheer. I watched other people cheer. I just remember watching that shit go down.
So
and like documenting it mentally.
One of our listeners has raised an interesting point. Lindsay asks or says, I feel like we've been spoon-fed the idea that cops need guns because the public has guns. And she says, I have no idea about the stats. Is this a true thing? And can it be addressed or resolved within our current time? I think that's a really interesting question.
I think that's a great point. And one of the problems with this framing of the police needing guns is it is based on the Second Amendment necessity of people needing guns to counter against a tyrannical government. So now that we see that the Second Amendment people don't actually give a fuck if the government goes all Tyrannosaurus Rex on black people, they're not gonna fucking do shit with their guns. So we can fucking dead that argument about needing those guns for fighting the government, and we can dead that argument about needing cops to be armed against the Second Amendment people, because guess what? They fucking go to Klan meetings together, so they're not going to be fighting against each other. Neither one of those sides need the motherfucking guns.
To go even further with the whole gun argument, being a former Marine, when I hear these white, like, I'm trying to find the expression to sum them up. You call them preppers or survivalists or total gun culture nuts. Go on about how they need their AR-15s, right, to save themselves from the tyrannical government. Not only are they not fucking doing it when tyranny is motherfucking here, right? Like, boom, it is right in our faces. But secondly, I'm like, I have been on naval ships with big artillery pieces. I have seen big ass fucking guns. The government has cruise missiles. The government has nuclear weapons. What do you think your little pea shooter is going to fucking do if the government decided to roll on you? You're fucked. A goddamn little gun isn't going to do it.
Nerve gas.
The enemy of that shit.
Fucking nerve gas. If they want to take people out, they just use chemicals.
They're called bunker busters. They have missiles called bunker busters that are meant to destroy these things that doomsday preppers have built. It's like the preppers took the PSYOPs handbook that was meant to make them targets. Yeah, just isolate yourself. Just put yourself in this little hole. You might even want to make it in a circle. Yeah, you put a moat around it. Make it feel like you're separated from people. But yeah, that's something that we can target with our satellites that are in space that can see what you're doing in your fucking kitchen using X-ray, because we have all that kind of shit where it's like, oh, we can use all of the electronics in your house to find the Wi-Fi signals to then create a sonar 3-dimensional map. So anytime anybody breathes or anytime anybody's heartbeat moves, that shit can beam up to our satellite. But you don't know that shit because you're too busy looking for fucking UFOs to realize this entire environment is just basically a sonar fucking testing ground to figure out ways to map our environments for them.
Well, they didn't learn. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, to jump off of that perspective, being a Desert Storm veteran, right? Two things. The first one, I remember one evening being on guard duty in a gun pit. Allied forces dropped a bomb so fucking big. The whole horizon lit the fuck up. Darkest night went to fucking daylight. The ground shook so fucking bad. 26-ton armored vehicles rang like tuning forks. Where the fuck did they get that bomb? I still don't know. I don't know what is in the American Arsenal that could do that.
The Moab.
Somebody above my pay grade could probably tell me that.
It's called the Moab. It's a non-nuclear incendiary device. It's a concussion device, and it's crazy. It kind of looks like a pine cone. And it creates such an intense shock wave that it levels everything within a certain radius, destroys windows. It'll completely destroy hearing. It's a pretty nasty thing. But I've got one thing to bring up before we go to our break, our first little break here. It's called Ruby Ridge. And this is
Randy Weaver.
Yeah, man. This is the fucking template for most survivalists. They want to hide away in their hole. The guy lost his best friend and his wife. I think his son was shot, right? I had an old Marine Corps buddy. Yeah.
When I was bringing up BLM,
and he was a fucking badass. He was like a highly trained special forces dude, right?
I had a Marine buddy when I was trying to talk about Black Lives Matter. He had to bring a known white nationalist to try to deflect from BLM. What kind of peak level bullshit is that? I totally bounced his ass and blocked him. But the fact that a dude in this era could go from George Floyd to try to compare him to Randy Weaver's is fucking dizzying. What the fuck?
Well, I think we need to stop making this about a single individual. We need to talk about genocide against Black people.
It's a mentality.
Exactly.
People will forget that we were just marching for Breonna Taylor and marching for Sean Reed. And
she almost fell out of the media.
Ahmaud Arbery. It happens too fast because there's others that have happened during the protests that we can't march for yet because people still think we're talking about George Floyd and not genocide by cop.
I think that where we're at, right? George Floyd was the catalyst, but sadly, there are hundreds of others.
I've actually got a list of people who have been murdered by police within recent times. We've got Trayvon Martin, Keith Scott, Atanya Jefferson, Jonathan Farrell, Jordan Edwards, Stephen Clark, Amado Dalio, Rashana McBride, Tamir Rice, Sean Bell, Walter Scott, Philandro Castile, Ayanda Jones, Terrence Crutcher, Alton Sterling, Freddie Gray, John Crawford, Michael Brown, Jordan Davis, Sandra Bland, Botham Dean, Oscar Grant, Corey Jones. That list shouldn't exist.
No. And you know what's the right wing? Philandro Castile sticks out in my brain, not because he's more or less important. They're all important. Full stop, right?
Well, he was pulled over in his car.
Stuck out of my mind because right-wingers used to be like, well, if Black folks were armed, Philandro Castile was a legal gun owner, a lawful legal gun owner according to legal rules, and he's still dead. And here we are.
Second Amendment people, silent as fuck.
Exactly. Fucking exactly.
Hey, we're going to take a short break. Here's some House Panther by Disco Bay.
This is what makes me house music.
As you were saying?
Oh, I'm here, man.
Yeah. What were you saying, man?
Oh, I don't know. Where's Chris?
Well, I think, I think we're at this really unique place where we have literally the most sophisticated communication methods that have existed in humanity, and everyone has a camera on their phone. And if they don't, then there's a way. There's got to be a way that we can redirect some of these budgets that we're using to militarize our police forces and give everyone phone with a camera. That way we can start to establish a stronger type of communication within our communities and help give people ownership over their neighborhood, so that they don't have to rely on some administrator who's not going to show up in time and only going to fill out a half-assed report just so they can, go to sleep scared. I mean, that seems like the most fucked up social contract that we've got going on. We have the most incredible technology that enables people to know what's going on down to the minute. I was watching 9 screen worth of this was like the most badass OBS master that I've ever seen. He had a Twitch feed, and they were just pulling up different protest videos. Chris and I I think we watched like 3 or 4 car chases, and a couple of them the people got away. Like,
wow,
this stuff wasn't possible a decade ago. Not in the way that it is now. It was prohibitively expensive to have access to this kind of technology, and now it's not. There are no excuses for other than our society is so bent on eking out every last drop of profit out of the system and that's really what prevents it. I mean, it's capitalism that keeps people in this place where they're forced into these positions of surrendering to something else's authority. When we have people, we have people.
Odin's back.
Well, I was gonna say, I don't know if either of you guys have been to Graceland, but this is gonna sound completely random and tangential.
This is exceptional randos.
Exactly, but only in Elvis's time, only somebody of his status could have 3 screens accessible at once.
I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Dude, you're living a dream that Elvis could not even fathom right now, in a way that's what I was getting at, is like everybody is like beyond Elvis's imagination in Elvis's time.
Actually, I was wrong. I've got 7.
In one room.
He
had his desk. Sorry, I was gonna say his desk and shit it was like awesome setup for the time, but now it would be a basic bitch setup. Straight up.
Here's the thing, man. Even outside of Elvis, I'm kind of a dated creature, man. Like, I was the first generation of combat veteran to have a GPS system on military grade vehicles. It was the first time we had brought that technology to bear on a wartime footing during Desert Storm. And it was revolutionary. And I didn't appreciate it as an 18, 19-year-old kid that we had GPS.
What year was that?
90, Grant, you're going to make me have a senior moment, Chris. I got in country in 91. Yeah, so it was like 91, 92 was when GPS was first used by the military in a full-on combat situation.
So for people that are unaware of how GPS made it into civilian hands, there was an airplane that had a U.S. senator on it that was leaving China and flew too close to North Korea, and they shot it down. And so the airline industry is like, we need a system that can help us position ourselves and locate where we are. And lo and behold, the military is like, oh, so we've been developing this cloud of satellites for quite a while now, and it wouldn't really be that difficult for us to give you access to it. It took a senator getting killed. It wasn't going to happen. They were going to keep that shit secret.
Chris and I were talking earlier in the week about the SR-71 Blackbird. I don't know if you're familiar with that plane. It was developed in the 60s. It wasn't known to even exist until the 1980s. The government had hid it. I mean, we have all sorts of technology and engineering that the government hides from the general population of civilians.
I remember being super obsessed with the Blackbird because it started being in like X-Men and pop culture, and it was in G.I. Joe. They had a silver one.
Yeah.
They had a black one too, but the black one was the Cobra version. The G.I. Joe one was the chrome one. And I just remember like being super obsessed with that, not realizing that the public was just finding out about it in the same way as me as a child. So it's like, it's interesting to look back and recognize how many adults who are still around were learning about things like the internet and, SR-71, like all these other things like AIDS. We all got the AIDS, HIV education at the same time, but we were at different points in time in our lives to understand our memories of like, I was hyper focused on Ryan White because I was a kid, and I'm a kid like, how do I not get AIDS? I'm like 9 years old. How do I not get AIDS? And I'm all worried about not getting AIDS as a kid, not understanding because the media talks around how you get it in a way where they like will openly discuss AIDS, but because they're trying to be quote unquote not safe for work or safe for children, they don't allude to sex. So meanwhile, kids like myself are seeing it and freaking out because this random 9-year-old got AIDS. So I'm like, I got to make sure I don't get AIDS too. Like, just completely irrationally, but in hindsight, it's not irrational for a 9-year-old to not understand how Ryan White got it because I don't understand blood transfusions, what the fuck that means at 9. So it's like, Am I going to have to get a blood transfusion? Is my blood transfusion going to get tainted? That's how I thought as a 9-year-old when I heard he got it from a blood transfusion. It's not like, oh, I'm never going to get a blood transfusion. Like, that's not how 9-year-olds think. 9-year-olds aren't rational. So it's amazing how much shit that people like. My dad got mad at me for I cuss a lot. As anybody who listens to the show more than one time, I cuss a lot because shit is fucked up. There's no other way to say it. Like, how are you gonna say what's going on? Shit is fucked up.
Well,
There's no other way to say it.
There's a great military perspective, right? If I'm barking commands, God forbid all three of us were in a tense combat situation, and I said, Chris, please move. Because you were about to get shot at.
I think we all know where this is going.
Move your fucking ass.
Yep.
You're gonna move, right? Like the language in relation to the stress level of either perceived and or reality to the situation demands that you are loud. And I have that problem too, man. I'm like, don't misunderstand my urgency for anger.
Fuck isn't the F word that hurts people. Fuck doesn't hurt people at all. Fuck is just an expletive. It might as well be a vocalization of an exclamation point. The 3-letter F word, however, that hurts people. That demeans people. So I don't really think of fuck as cursing so much. It's it's a really powerful accent.
Yeah, to me, the idea of swearing gets across a point when you have to be quick, right? Like, and Chris has talked about this, and man, he summed it up best about humor and language. Right-wingers are not funny, right? Like, it's like you think you're edgy and you're saying something like, "Oh, shocking!" No, you're just a dick.
Yep, and what's funny about that is, like, I think in many cases you can be super funny without actually using bad language, and it's not always necessary. But as Tien said, it's an accent mark in many cases, and you have people that get so concerned with the accent marks that they will overlook the entire sentence in order to point at the accent mark. And that's repeatedly where one of the points my dad made to me in trying to get me to curse less is nobody remembers the fucking quotes that nobody that in which people use bad language. When I'm like, the times everybody spoke nicely and didn't cuss, that shit didn't get us nowhere. So I'm going to say fuck until we fucking get somewhere, because that's what the fuck I feel in my soul, you know? So that's where it's like, it's funny to me, like, what previous generations, because I saw a 23-year-old black woman post about how she's protesting, and like most of her critique is coming from older black men because they don't like the way she's protesting. Like, and that's where I'm like, how the fuck did the older generation try to rein in what the younger generation is doing when the older generation didn't fix this shit? Y'all can't tell us what the fuck to do if y'all didn't fix this shit. So get the fuck out of our way. That's what it is, period. Get the fuck out of our way, man. Watching
Orlando Jones and American Gods give the most angry, curse word filled dialogue in angry get shit done fucking floored me. It was perfect. But yet there's probably a whole group of people who are like, oh, that was too angry, oh, it cursed too much. How the fuck did you not hear that righteous poetry? Fuck. Some of the best written shit I've ever heard in a long time in television or literature was Orlando Jones in American Gods, because it was boiled down, angry and cursing, right? Like,
man, I think wait, was he in the movie Evolution? He played like
yes,
man. That's
absolutely.
Like he there's this one scene when David Duchovny is telling him to shut up. He's like, you better watch it or you'll have an angry solid gold dancer on your hands. And so in my mind, like with his role in American Gods, it's such a departure from that first experience with him as an actor. It floored me.
Well, and the crazy thing, I haven't even watched the show, but knowing what the show is about, like, I don't know if y'all know, he got basically kicked off the show.
Oh my God. Yeah.
But I don't know if you know, his character is based on a real West African god, like Anansi.
Kope Anansi, the spider god.
And that's where it's funny that like now a couple of years, I guess it's probably like a year or two later after he got kicked off the show, like what's happening in America is like, you know,
see what they fucking did? Damn it. Well, and here's the thing about Kope Anansi. He's the archetype of the trickster god that gets you to behave, that gets you on the right path. The
African Loki, for people who don't have other context.
Right there, man. And this is why I love you, Chris. He's the African Loki. Right out the gate. That's what he is.
And that's where, again, it's like there's a lot more connection with Viking lore because they adopted, or the Vikings weren't all white people, which is crazy that people still think that they would like take on other peoples in their tribes. It wasn't a ton, but that's how their lore ended up. It doesn't go back that far. They aren't, their lore is not that old. So when you talk about Norse mythology, it's a lot of it is a culmination of other shit. And they had been exposed to like North and West African stuff too. So it's like, you know, there's all these connections with lore that it's hard to know where shit really came from.
Yeah, right. The Norse mythology have Yggdrasil, the life tree, the baobab tree. It's the same.
Yep.
It's the same thing. I don't know if you study Jung and like universal archetypes, those resonate.
Yep.
Loki is a Nazi, right? And I sadly I don't know enough about Native American mythology, but I know that is it coyote?
The coyote, the crow, the fox. Those are all variations.
Thank you.
Incidentally, I wear the mark of the Chinese trickster. I wear the mark of the monkey on my shoulder.
Yeah, and to the Japanese, it's the kitsune. They're the tricksters. There's a trickster. The trickster isn't necessarily malevolent, but he can be an asshole to you if you're not on the right path.
Well, and this is where a lot of those, like jinn, and now what we allude to as genie come in the stories where some of these spirits are not bad, but they have their own agendas. And if your agenda doesn't align with theirs, then they're not going to be on your side and they'll trick you.
In the Chinese mythology, the monkey reveals your virtue. So if you're a good person, the monkey will help you realize that. And if you're a shitbird, the monkey will lead you through the path of temptation and probably leave your ass high and dry somewhere in the jungle. It's
just a monkey spirit, right? That's its job.
I mean, none of the heavenly creatures learn their virtue. Like the tiger doesn't learn his strength. The dragon doesn't learn its wisdom without the monkey. The monkey is the trickster itself is intrinsically tied to the development of protagonists or even antagonists throughout every culture that we find. And part of it is, I mean, we hear mostly about the times that the trickster has helped people to become more, but sometimes the trickster doesn't. Sometimes the trickster just reveals that an individual,
who you really are.
Yeah, that's kind of, so it's a really important aspect.
And it's interesting that when you kind of Rolodex through mythologies, strangely, the Egyptians really don't have a trickster spirit. They don't have one. And I would love to be able to pick the mind of folklorists, mythologists, and historians why they don't have one. I don't know why that one's missing.
I don't know if it's that they don't have one. It's that they have deities that engage in deceit. So I don't the idea of a god of something, I think, is a Western, it's not only Western, but to try to restrict these things into like, oh, the god of the sun is not that simple. Like, oh, Thoth is the god of knowledge. No, it's not. It's not quite that simple. They're like gods that bring certain things to people.
Our own Daniel Aylott has pointed out that it is Kokopelli. And let's see here. What can I find about that real quick?
Yeah, but back to Chris about the Egyptian thing. Sutek, Set in Western, he does sort of fulfill that.
Yeah, exactly. He's not like an art, like specifically a god. There again, he's not specifically a god of deceit.
Yeah, he's definitely not to quote a Zen maxim, not
Set.
always so. He's not technically a
Satesh.
trickster.
Oh, Set and Satesh.
Different.
There we go.
What's that?
Set and Satesh are the Egyptian god and goddesses of that fill the role of trickster, but they do so much more. They
Exactly.
exactly.
Like reducing them to trickster.
Yeah.
It's like for the sake of people who need to frame like the only reason I said the African Loki is because people in America need to frame things through the Western lens because it's a colonialist mindset. They'll never frame it through like the monkey, like the Chinese monkey mindset, because that's Eastern philosophy. It's the same trope, but nobody in America who's not Chinese will
Chris,
never.
I think you hit on something very important, man. Like even older European cultures were way more nuanced in how they viewed things. Americans seem to. It's very dichotomous. It's very binary.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I have a friend of mine who ended up, he was enlisted in the Army, got a commission, got out. And of all things, I sort of saw it coming. He became a professor. He has a full doctorate. In Hinduism, he's fluent. He can read and write in Sanskrit. And he has always got people on blast when they try to like westernize Hindu gods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that shit's real bad. People don't even like realize how bad that shit is, man. I learned about it a few years ago, but it's really bad how much the West has colonized the lens through which people view Hindi and Indian religions, in the sense of like all Indian religions aren't necessarily Hindu or Hindi. And again, it's like a super complex religious geographical intersection, because there's even like Muslims in India where they've been there for hundreds of years at this point.
Yeah, and then you got and God forbid you try to explain Sikhism to a lot of Western.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God.
Yeah, because again, it's shit is too complex to the point where it's like I'm not equipped to speak on all of the complexity in India, but that's because I know I'm not equipped. Many people will think, "Oh, I know." Right? Yeah.
I know about fucking Ganesh and Krishna. I can talk about this stuff.
Before. I can talk like no. I had the story of creation explained to me. I'm not about to sit here and fucking like spit out the Indian fucking story of creation as if that's my religion or my culture.
Right.
Talking, and that's like,
I've read some of the Upanishads and part of the Bhagavad Gita, but I'm not even going to pretend that I've even scratched the surface of their culture and religion.
Yeah.
The Chinese, I don't think they actually have a real creation mythology. I think in Chinese lore, the universe exists long before humans do, and the Jade Emperor has just been around.
That's it? It's kind of simple though, right? Like it works.
I mean, why try and explain something that they didn't try to make up something that they didn't understand, I think is the point.
Oh my God. Something revealing about myself. For many years of my life, I was a practicing Muslim. And I remember an argument, a religious argument one time at a mosque.
Oh.
And it was about a scholar, Imam al-Ghazali, who was brilliant. Oh my God. He was hard to read because he was so intelligent. But basically he boiled down an argument when somebody came to him trying to challenge him. And he's like, well, where does God sit, right? And Imam al-Ghazali calmly looked at him. And I'm paraphrasing because the argument obviously was out of Arabic. But he looked at him, he's like, how dare you ask that question? You don't even know where you sit.
Well,
that's where we are as humans.
that's like, so in Taoism, there's the Tao that is the named, and then there's the Tao that is the unnamed. The Tao that is the named is not the eternal, and the Tao that is the unnamed is the eternal, in that this is the most philosophical explanation of the beginning from a philosophy that's not a religion, and it doesn't name it. It doesn't try to name everything. It like limits itself. And it's like it actively cuts itself off from trying to name beyond its capacity.
Taoism seeks understanding, and it tries to find balance and order through chaos by reaching an understanding and through observation. It's almost like the principles of the scientific method in a lot of ways.
Oh, imagine that. Scientific method. Something very much missed in our society these days. Which brings me back. I was thinking about going back more to our topic that we kind of initially wanted to tackle. I don't know if you guys have got to read the articles that I had put up about the formations of American police departments and policing.
Oh, that shit's just dark and fucked up. It's so fucked up.
Oh, I mean, I already knew that.
Yeah.
That's shit. Black people are all fucking paralegals by the time we're 18, bro. We all know about the history of the fucking police all the way back to the slave force, all the way up to the fucking Irish integrations. Right? Like, we all have to know about that shit, or else we don't survive, like, straight up.
And here's the thing, man. I talked to my wife about this phenomenon, man. I was like, here's the thing. Combat veterans obviously have some degree of post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's you have it individually and you have it in units, right? And I think over time, cultures have it. And I had my epiphany just a few days ago, man. I was like, here's the thing, man. I don't even have a fucking clue what it's like to be Black in America. But my thought was, I was like, man, I've been in combat, man. I've seen trauma. And then I thought, man, Black folks, since they were brought up in this country, they have to kind of be taught, don't go here, don't say this, be like this. Like, you have the fear hanging over your fucking heads constantly. And I'm like, wow, man, there's a humanity to be shared. It's like, you have culturally inherited, sadly, post-traumatic stress disorder. Why can't people see this?
It's because those people want that system to exist because it makes them feel powerful when they're not rich, is what it comes down to. It's not that they can't see it, it's that they don't want it to go away. And that's the problem with trying to rationalize with these people, because they've had 70 fucking years to get rid of the system. It's the same fucking people. A lot of them are still around. The ones that sit on the fence, the fucking fence sitters, those are the ones that pretend they don't understand that the system is there, because they understand, they just don't want it to change. And that's what it comes down to, is like, all the people that pretend they say they don't see racism in 2020 are fucking liars. I will not accept that somebody in 2020 doesn't see racism. I will only accept that they're lying about it because they either want to not participate in fighting against it, or they actively want to make it look like they're not racist so they can subvert deconstructing racism in society. I do not believe that a grown-ass adult in 2020 does not see racism. I just don't buy it anymore.
Straight up, you don't get a pat on the back or an award for doing the right thing anymore. That's that whole everybody gets an award bullshit's over.
Yeah, right.
I've seen so many fence posts in the last week where someone pretends to ask the hard question and they want to assume the role of devil's advocacy, and it's like, there's no devil's advocate. That's just a platform for people to ask questions that they really want to ask because they're actually thinking those things. You can't pretend to establish that kind of position unless you actually believe it.
Why do you always want to play devil's advocate against the victim and never against the cop?
I feel like
exactly, right?
Why?
They're a piece of shit. That's why. Why else would somebody want? Why do people victim blame? It's because they're assholes. It's like,
man, I constantly see, like, what do they call themselves? What's that new? You got the Oath Keepers. You got the 3%ers. You could give a fuck when black dudes, black women, black trans folk were being killed. But as soon as a motherfucking Target was being looted, you're all fucking like moral and like on it. Like, fuck you.
Oh no, they had destroyed our shrine.
Yeah, your shrine of consumerism. Fuck you. Like, just fuck off. And that leads me to the other thing. It's like, how can you have any sort of morality when you see, like, metaphorically or literally, somebody gets slapped, punched, kicked, or killed, obviously in the most extreme end, do those things and then be like, well, let's be civil. No, fuck off. You forfeited that right to civility. We're done.
So I think we should actually, I don't know if we covered the Abolish the Police actual solution enough, because one of the issues is, like, people can talk about problems all day, but how do you actually replace the police? And this is where, I mean, I'm just saying this in that there are things that police have to do that go beyond crime, which they shouldn't be doing either. So when we're talking about responding to mental health, we should have a whole entire force that's dedicated to responding to mental health situations that is not physical health responses, because you don't want the people who have to respond to someone flipping out because they're seeing fucking flying monkeys having to be the same person to respond to someone who just fell off a building and broke their back. Those are two completely different things. And you don't want the same people responding as if it's good for any party involved for someone to have to be responding to that broad of a range of scenarios. So it's like, if you have people who are dedicated to responding to gunshots, dedicated to responding to broken bones, dedicated to responding to pregnancies, dedicated to responding to all of the actual problems in society, instead of just saying, oh, fucking EMT, here you go, EMT, fucking EMT, then we'll first off have a lot better response to problems that then get escalated by police response into violent situations that shouldn't have had to been violent in the first place. So then when you have violent situations, you need to actually have neighbors in that area who are trained and connected into a system that gives people access to have their neighbors respond, to check up on them in a way that is decentralized, but also in a way that allows people to control their information. Because then There is no cop on the fucking planet that will be able to respond to an emergency situation in my home faster than one of my neighbors. I don't care how far the neighbor is from me. If it's one of my neighbors that's an actual neighbor, there is no cop in this fucking city that will be able to respond faster than one of my neighbors. So this is where we need to leverage our actual neighbors into our violence response system. So when you have these fucking, it's not even going to be the Second Amendment people. It's the people who actually want to serve justice, who don't see that the cops are serving the justice that society deserves, because that's not what we're getting in the police force.
Yeah, they're serving the property.
Yeah, yep. You've hit upon something that's going to be an uncomfortable truth that America has to face. We're so indoctrinated with individualism and privacy, we've forgotten what the idea of the greater good is, right? Like they say they do, but they fucking don't. Like you said, your neighbors, man, like the idea of the beautiful idea of you take from the past what is good and you discard what is complete bullshit, and you synthesize in the modern era what works. There used to be a time period when people did know one another, right? Like you'd be like, oh man, so-and-so, was in the war, or so-and-so got injured working for the trains, right? Like everybody knew one another. Now, if you uncouple like the 1950s bullshit like that people had when they knew each other and be like, let's synthesize our communalness, right? Like you said, Chris, like your neighbors, like this rugged individualism bullshit feeds like the idea that we got to have cops.
Well, and it's crazy because, I remember one time I was outside of my apartment at 1 a.m. because I came home from work to grab clothes to go back to work. And I saw somebody trying to break into one of my neighbor's apartment complexes. And the guy tried to get me to join in. So I can only assume he had some horrible intentions in mind. I end up chasing this guy off, call the cops. The cops show up with his window fucking rolled down. About 5 minutes later, the guy's gone, long gone. The cop fucking stops his car and starts yelling at me, hand on his gun, because I have to chase him down because he's in the wrong part of the fucking neighborhood. So not only did I call the cops to try to help my neighbor, who I actually end up saving, then the cop shows up and is about to get violent with me because he's not even paying attention what's happening in the fucking neighborhood. So that's where I'm like, my experience with protecting one's own neighborhood versus how the cops, like, if I hadn't seen that shit, the neighbor would have been filing some sort of report. I don't know what kind of report she would have been filing. God knows. But the cop would have just been there to fucking take the fucking report. The neighbor was the one that can see that shit. The neighbor is the one that can look out the window and fucking be like, oh, something's not right. Oh, I heard some glass break. I heard somebody scream. Let me go check on that. The cop ain't there, and if the cop's in the neighborhood, their fucking windows up, so they can't hear me screaming, running after them, trying to help my neighbor. So when I finally catch them, they think I'm the fucking criminal because I'm freaking out trying to get their attention, and I'm black, so they can't see me at night. And his window can't hear me fucking screaming at him. So then they're in my neighborhood and they're still disconnected from me if I'm screaming at them because they're in this bubble that the fucking police state has created for them to fucking police my neighborhood and police me, but not be part of my neighborhood and be part of the response instead of just showing up to take the fucking report. 'Cause that's what he did that night. He just took the fucking report. I'm the one that chased off the prowler. I had to chase off the fucking prowler. I'm not asking for a pat on the back. I'm saying I had to fucking take the responsibility because that's not what the fuck the cops are protecting right now. They're not protecting my neighbors.
It's a fair thing. It's like you don't want a pat on the back, but don't blame me for shit I didn't do. Right? Like that fucking simple. Don't blame me for the shit that motherfucker tried to do when I was trying to stop that dude.
I think that's a reflection of the culture of policing. They get on the scene and they want everyone to stop what they're doing. And if anyone doesn't just react immediately and comply, then clearly they're the problem. I mean,
exactly.
I can't tell you how many of my friends have told me that they've stressed to their children, you can never run from the police. Like, they'll shoot your ass. Like, straight up, they will shoot you. Don't run. Whatever you do, remain calm. Taking a beating is still better than getting shot to death. And it's terrifying because these are like my friends' children. I mean, I'm sorry, I got real dark. We're going to take another short break. We'll be right back with you. This is Johnny Hassel. Feels like a dream. And we're back. I think we really ought to focus on the community framework that Chris has been describing. I think it's
absolutely.
I think it's really there's a really solid scalable plan or platform, or I guess framework that he's alluded to at this point, which scales up really nicely, because it's not just you and your neighbor. As soon as a community emerges and the next door neighbor or the next door community emerges, that's also a neighbor. And so once you have communities that can leverage this communication technology that we have in front of us, all of a sudden it becomes possible for community aid to emerge. And then slowly, as communities multiple form, then we start to see small towns or small cities emerge. And while it takes a little bit more to coordinate, these groups can all act independently and together.
So just to give some more exploration into this concept, just because it was way before ahead of its time, in that, as I said earlier, we were doing this in, I think, 2018. Over time, we had been preparing this. What is now, it's a living document, in the sense that I went to someone who is trained. He has taught many students. He is a teacher of modernese. He's also a Sifu under Dan Inosanto in that art, and is also a highly trained individual. So he's taught a lot of people, including law enforcement officers, in various arts. So I went to him to try to develop a concept that would be scalable in this neighborhood watch program, to say, if you were to teach people a set of things to defend their neighborhood, how would you go about it? And the first thing, he thought about it for a long time. His first thought was that there needed to be a cohesive philosophy that grounded the ethics in it, in order to make sure that people didn't get out of line and it never got away from what the original intention was. And in naming it, the working title is The Philosophy of Justice League Karate, in that when you have neighborhood defense organizations, they would be effectively the foundation of modern day justice leagues, because at the core, they would be meant to establish an organization that sought justice for society. So these are no longer comic book ideas. We are at the point where we need to start establishing justice leagues. So in establishing their core philosophies, one of the core propositions is the use of physical violence includes an obligation to consider the impacts to other people and society if it is to be ethical. Another core proposition is individual people live in unique circumstances with different systems of ethics and notions of what is important. Therefore, the individual has to apply their ethical thinking in some way to their circumstances. There is no standardized approach to decision making. So this is where he is starting out in the first philosophical founding of this, establishing that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to situation de-escalation. So it's things like this where he has a 6-page document that's a growing, living document with ideas like these that are meant to be challenged, that are meant to be analyzed and looked at by other specialists, other people who will be affected by these concepts, to say, these things are great, but these things are completely wrong. And if somebody says they're completely wrong, then they'll have to challenge the experience of someone who's been training in martial arts and been training law enforcement officers for X amount of years, and also had other law enforcement officers look at this already. So again, it's like, one of the first things I did is have a law enforcement officer who trains martial arts, a black belt in Japanese judo, look at this and say, what do you think about this? They have not yet contributed necessarily, but they didn't have any glaring inconsistencies as someone who was a law enforcement officer at the time. So there's all these ways of going about establishing new law enforcement that can include law enforcement officers in the first place. So we're not saying that in abolishing police, we don't include police officers in the new establishing of the police force, but we just erased the mandate that they have now, because the mandate that they have now is completely wrong and it does not work for society.
Well, yeah, you know what, man? It's definitely a multi-pronged approach, man. And Chris, you're brilliant, man. Like,
I didn't come up with that for the sake of, like, I didn't come up with those tenets, and that's why I'm not trying to take credit for those.
Oh, no, but you found it, right? Like, you found it, right? Like, that is you, but you didn't create it. But what, to expound upon that, man, like, you gotta, I don't feel as if American police take the patience to understand cultural idiosyncrasies and the differences between them. That's one thing that needs to be addressed on top of what you had just said. Like, it's not an unobtainable model to basically sort of completely wipe a police force and start from the ground up. You know, the idea, know your neighborhood. And it's not just a matter of cultural idiosyncrasies. Like, if you have a culture that's very understood, trying to think of one that a lot of people have not heard of in this country, the Hmong. Like, if you have a Hmong immigrant community that is in your town, it is wise on so many levels to have a Hmong police officer or some sort of officer that understands those cultural idiosyncrasies, right? And you cultivate that sense of community and justice. I mean, there's so much I think America has to de-learn or unlearn, and then that we have to just learn from new, right? Like, we're at a state where most Americans don't even know that the American police forces are built on the model of runaway slave patrols for several generations. You don't unlearn that overnight. You either have to completely dismantle it abruptly, or you want to take the kind of, I think, is ridiculous approach to gently unlearn it over generations. That doesn't work either.
As if they haven't been trying to unlearn it, though. That's like, you're of the good mind, so you've been like, oh, they just haven't unlearned it. They haven't been trying to unlearn it.
Exactly.
And this is where, when they transitioned to Irish immigrants policing black neighborhoods, that became a tradition of policing outside force or outside neighborhoods from where they lived, in a way that when you were seeing Andy Griffith police his own neighborhood, that's not the way police were working. So this is another aspect of police should be policing their own neighborhoods. If we're not going to completely destroy the police force, they should be policing a 10 block or whatever 20 block radius around where they reside, because then you have to sleep in the neighborhood where you police little Jimmy or little Johnny or little Susie or whatever, and then they know where you live. And if you beat the shit out of somebody, they know where you sleep, and then they'll burn your house down while you're sleeping, because you can't retreat to the safety of your own neighborhood away from the people that you just fucked with all day.
Yeah, well, that's actually something that my wife and I had spoke about, was that, like, cops need to be where they are, where they live. Not like, you always hear about it, like even Chauvin was not from Minneapolis. What the fuck? It's like, it's an old, outdated fucking model that just needs to be completely uprooted and completely redone.
Yeah. So that's a good segue to, I'll read a section of this document to establish another philosophical framework from which people in this listening can understand that when we're talking about getting rid of the police, we're not ignorant. We're not. We understand that there are problems in the world. So here we'll talk about this section. Risks of physical violence on an individual exist in the current world people live in. We are a maturing species and in many ways live in a day-to-day safer world than many of our ancestors, but people act violently towards each other in a variety of circumstances. This represents a risk that should be considered. No amount of risk mitigation will guarantee safety. You can mitigate or reduce risk, but you always face risks. If the goal is complete safety, it is unachievable, and people need to address that reality on some level. I propose using a basic cost-benefit framework that compares the effort you put into maintaining safety with the safety benefits, not classical economics that tries to monetize everything, but a conceptual cost-benefit. This discussion of security theater has a lot of institutional implications, but this discussion is focused on the individual level. Others should look at institutional security theater. To bring it back to that individual level, there's a fundamental issue that needs to be improved about how people assess and react to risk. To be ethical, those in power need to look at their risk realistically and consider the resulting impact of risk mitigation on the less powerful. For people who already have a high level of safety, marginal improvements in their safety that create risks for others have to be considered ethically. This is one of the important aspects of when we're talking about the orange clown, he who shall not be named,
his name is Orange.
the coward in the bunker. His reaction to protests did not put the people who are impacted by police brutality at any point in his thought process. All he cared about is what he perceived to be as reestablishing law and order. When you have the military coming out and saying that his statements were not in line with the military's ideals and what they believe to be virtuous, that is a response that considers the people being impacted by police brutality and how they're responding, because on one hand, you have a statement and response that escalates it, and on the other hand, you have an empathetic statement and response by someone in a position of authority to de-escalate. And this is where, again, you have to acknowledge the military brass when they are doing the right thing, because all military are not automatons, and we can't treat our military brothers and sisters as if they are evil, vile people because they got given bad orders and make the same mistake that happened in Vietnam. We can't make that mistake. When the military is given bad orders, it's on the good soldiers to defy those bad orders. But as citizens, we can't hold the people. We can hold the people who are afraid of court martial accountable, but in light of being in a situation where it's in the middle of it, we can't act like we can't understand, because a lot of these people were lied to and a lot of these people were manipulated in times where they were down and out. So we have to be the bigger people and say, hey, I'm not going to be the petty person and start shitting on the military for being in the military right now. Now is like, yes, if you join the military, and the problem is the military preys on ignorant people. The ROTC preys on ignorant people. It preys on people who don't understand history, to know that when they're joining up the military, they're not joined to protect freedom. They're not joining to keep people safe.
What is it? Give us 4 years of your life and we might give you $35,000 for college, maybe?
Here's a truth bomb from a former Marine point of view that most people, but you two, probably already know. But for everybody out there, General Smedley Butler wrote a treatise called War is a Racket. Wrote it in the early 1900s. He was a decorated Marine officer. And I'm going to leave that there so people can just read it without any bias. Go read it. Go look at it. Right? Like, I mean, when I enlisted, man, I was an idealist kid. I enlisted when I was 17 as like, and this is something I kind of wanted to bring up in relation to sort of like law enforcement and the deification. Like my family, white Midwestern family, it was like they deified uniforms, whether it was a police uniform or a military uniform, right? Like this whole culture of this deification of law enforcement. And Chris, you and I have talked at length in different formats about the conflation of justice and legality and what is moral and what is legal. And I saw a group, a culture in my family, if it's legal, it's moral. It's astoundingly terrible. And that's one of the things we have to dismantle. We have to untangle morality from what is legal or what is illegal. And one step of that road to be able to get to the point where we can a cultural shift definitely has to happen.
Well, the crazy shit is, so I'm doing a doctorate right now. I'm in an ethics class right now. The world is changing too fast for the fucking ethics teacher to keep up with this shit.
Oh my God, yeah.
So I'm saying, like, fuck, man, I feel bad for anybody who has to write a goddamn chapter about 2020 in a history class or a history book. Right? But fuck, man, every goddamn week the ethics teacher is talking about some shit that was like, his lesson plan was from shit for like last year, but the stuff he's talking about from week to week is like, you know, one week it was the pandemic, the next week is the fucking breakdown of societal's understanding of the necessity of police and how much have police actually been protecting society in the first place and what they've been lied to about that concept.
You can't tell me not to get a haircut. That's tyranny. Well, you shouldn't go protest then.
Well, and here's the thing. There have been police departments that have went to court to sue for the idea that they don't have to protect and serve. That's fucking batshit insane, man.
Oh no, it's worse than that. It's a Supreme Court thing.
It's fucking diabolic and evil is what it is.
These cops are fucking out of control.
Where is it? Come on. New York Times in June 28th of 2005, Supreme Court justices ruled that police do not have a constitutional duty to protect someone.
Yeah, that's insane.
That was 15 years ago. Supreme Court ruled that the police did not have a constitutional duty to protect someone from harm. Even a woman who had obtained a court-issued protective order against a violent husband, making an arrest for mandatory for violation. They don't have to protect her. You know, this is the Supreme Court said, "No, sorry guys, you don't have to do your job anymore."
And this is
it violates the social contract completely.
Yeah, that you just want to have a metaphorical 2x4 and maybe sometimes a real one when these people are like, there's no systemic racism, there's no inherent evil in the system, it's right fucking in front of you, plain as day.
So I feel like we should shift slightly to to a more positive subject in that one of the problems with what's happening right now is that it's hard to know like when you should like stop like looking at things to give yourself a break. So this is not looking away, but looking at one of the more hilarious events of the last 48 hours now. So I love K-pop fans right now. I don't really care about K-pop, but I fucking love K-pop fans because over the last 48 hours on various social media platforms, K-pop fans have been taking over hashtags associated with white supremacist movements, all lives matter movements, and now QAnon currently to subvert fascists and racists. And it's one of the most hilarious things that I've seen from social media movements or people in that, like, I didn't really know what to think of K-pop people because they have a weird, like, internet culture in that they do these things called, like, fan vids or fan casts or something. I forget what it's called, but it's like, I think it's like they have all these weird things that they do within K-pop culture. Now anything that's white supremacist, like hashtag, is flooded with all those things because they fucking hate racists. So like overnight, this segment of like weird niche culture has gained my respect and love because they have like used their power on the internet to try to stamp out racism.
Like, I never would have guessed that K-pop. And to add to that, Chris, goth and punk, like subculture in real life and on Twitter has started to burn motherfuckers down.
Oh, punk people have always been about that shit, man.
Yeah, to be fair, I mean, I came from that subculture myself as a kid, but to watch it on social media, just like blast.
Well, and that's why I want to give punk credit, because like punk people have like, there's racists within punk culture, but there's like, it's counterculture within punk to be anti-racist. So you have a lot of anti-skinheads that were punk rock. It's like super crazy that there's there's a whole
subsection of skinhead culture that revolved around ska and reggae before it got involved in like National Front racism elements, right? Like they were all into two-tone ska, and they're very different cultures. But just to see like gothic folks and like punk people on the internet now on Twitter, like just burn these fuckers down. It's so killer, man. It's just like, and you got like the Amish and the Mennonites, like on Twitter and Facebook, condemning this shit for real and not just for aesthetics. And then you got like witchcraft groups. It's astounding.
Yeah, because now, you know, it's funny the notion of like, how do you have unity around anything? And now it's like, when you see Amish people, like clearly they're in Amish communities, we don't have to explain to them what Black Lives Matter means, and they fucking will stand with Black Lives Matter signs and not have to have somebody be like, well, why shouldn't we say all lives matter? So when I see K-pop people flooding the internet to like stamp, and the funny thing about the QAnon hashtag is like, the reason they're doing it is because they're flooding the conspiracy theorists' information source. So now the conspiracy theorists, all they can get is K-pop fan cams and fucking K-pop fucking dancing gifs and fucking music that's like K-pop now. They can't get their conspiracy. They can't get their Pizzagate shit They can't get their Alex Jones because the K-pop fucking army is out. The K-pop fucking army's on it, man.
Oh, and here's another one, man. Like, you've seen this, but there's a handful of professional wrestlers on like the sort of lower level circuits and the big promotions.
Yeah.
Starting to unite. I mean,
well, it's like there's riffs coming out because I think it was like Chris Jericho.
Oh yeah,
I used to watch wrestling when I was a kid. But now I like follow Dave Bautista because he's an actor, and you know The Rock is The Rock. Everybody fucking loves The Rock.
The Rock. Well, even the wrestler Randy Orton.
Right.
I saw him do a great tweet, and I'm trying to paraphrase it properly. He's like, "Okay, man, we get it. All lives matter, but all lives matter don't matter until Black lives matter." Get it? Right? Like, he burned them down. And I'm like, Randy Orton? Props, man. I did not see that coming.
You see, this shit where you didn't see it coming, like, who saw Ben & Jerry's coming out with the Fuck the Police ice cream fucking flavor?
Lego. Pulling ads for their Lego sets that had police in it.
Yeah.
And I've heard that they even are going to pull production on their Lego sets that have police in them. And they released a statement. Lego.
So, for those of you that have the Facebook feed up, I've sampled some current images of QAnon, White Lives Matter, and Blue Lives Matter, and as you can see, it's unity creates peace. Unity is humanity. The world is what we make it. And then there's some pink-haired person like snapping their fingers to some hearts. And then we've got a group for the White Lives Matter. It's got like a K-pop dance group or a K-pop group, and they're all wearing white jackets. And then below it, it's a cartoon girl looking in the mirror, and she sees a clown. And then for Blue Lives Matter, it's a picture of like blue cartoon characters. I mean, straight up, they just, you can't even see anything that somebody who's going to those things would actually be looking for. It's incredible. Like, I mean, that's just the first 3 images I found under each tag. I mean, I'm sure I could find much juicier, more fucked up shit if I really wanted to, but.
Well, it's not. It's wholesome ass shit. That's the funniest part about it.
Oh, I know.
Wholesome ass K-pop fucking like it's like your family could look at that shit because the K-pop army is gonna flood you with some wholesome shit. And you're like, oh,
yeah, right?
Okay. All right.
It might not be so safe when you tread into punk and goth Twitter as far as language, but I could give a shit.
And that's what's so hilarious about it is like it's so in character for them. I know when I was in Seoul, when you enter the airport, there's like an area for fucking pop music groups to be performing at the airport. So when you get to Seoul, you're hit with fucking K-pop. And that's where you're like, it's not out of line with that culture for the K-pop army to then be responding with the most wholesome ass shit, because it's like a bunch of them are probably teenagers and a bunch of them are early 20s, where you're like, I mean, even the probably early 30s, mid 30s people in that, they're not vile people in the first place. So yeah, they're gonna hit you with some pictures of like the Blue Man Group or like pictures of the Smurfs on like Blue Lives Matter, and then they're like, Blue Lives Matter.
The positive, man.
Yeah, with the positive shit.
John fucking Boyega.
Oh,
he was the treasure.
Love that. Yeah, man.
He's a fucking treasure. So many people in Hollywood, even though I have my opinions about celebrity, people are backing him up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he is not alone. And then I'm into the Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000 hobby, right? Games Workshop. They even released a statement, right? And of course, it got all the fucking, like, you know, neckbeard, incel, basement dwelling, like, well, actually crowd all pissed off that they're like,
oh man,
calling this shit out, and I'm like, well, fuck you too, man.
Rockstar Games delayed activity on their servers. You couldn't, for some period of time, you would have been unable to play Red Dead or GTA, and fucking Sony has suspended the release of the PlayStation 5. People who have paid good money for their next-gen console can't get their next-gen console because some dumb motherfuckers are out there ruining it for everyone else. These are bought and paid-for devices. I mean, Sony's not fucking around. Rockstar didn't fuck around. I saw so many posts, people like, I've been waiting for 30 minutes to play Red Dead, or I've been waiting 30 minutes to play GTA. I'm done with this shit. And it's like, seriously? These are people who are so bubbled that they don't even realize what's going on. They don't have the wherewithal to look on the internet.
Oh yeah, right.
We've got we're surrounded by technology. It's so easy to look this stuff up.
If you guys have seen in New Zealand, I don't know what it is about me, man, but there's something when I see a haka done by Maori that just moves my heart. And I've seen these hakas come out of solidarity. It's just like, wow. Like, it's out of this horrible, evil shit has come some beautiful things.
Yeah, man. Well, that's again, like, I think what we're seeing is long overdue. And it's only bad if you wanted shit to stay the way it was. So that's why I'm like,
yeah, shit's got to change. Chris, I don't know if you remember, I shared with you, there's even a Norse group that put up a Norse shield with a black power fist.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like solidarity, man. Like, at least these people... And they've always been there. I've kind of, like, I have this attitude. It's like, I've seen you 5 months ago or a year ago or 2 years ago. You're still here. And, the idea is like, look around you. Look around you, to your left, to your right. And I don't mean metaphorically, politically. I mean physically. Look where you are. Remember these people.
Yeah. Oh, that's the truth right there. We're only here for a little while in the grand scheme of things, and the time that we get to spend with people that enrich our lives and and contribute in a meaningful way, it's limited. I've lived in Bloomington most of my life, and I can't even count. I can't even remember how many people have come and gone in my world who made an impact, and then here I am 10, 20 years later. I'm not sure if I remember them. So, but at the time, these were my friends. These were my best friends. These are the people I hung out with all the time. And so when I think about that stuff now, it's like, man, I either had a lot of fun, so much fun that I can't remember, or I didn't value those people enough when they were around. And so now here I am. I absolutely value the interactions that I have with my friends. These are, y'all are my family. We choose our family. We choose our tribe. It's not just some genetics or some paperwork.
You always find your tribe. You find your people, no matter who they are.
And I'm not trying to get all tribal about this stuff, but I mean, really, like we define our own boundaries and we create our own families. So that's important stuff. Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.